Estrogen is the queen of all of the female reproductive hormones. This video spotlights the importance of estrogen, explains why it's important, its role in the female menstrual cycle, how it interacts with the other hormones, and what you can do if your estrogen levels are lower than optimal. I'm Stephanie Roth. I'm a fertility consultant and coach with Your Fertile Self, and I've said it before many times, our menstrual cycle is a complicated and intricate dance of our hormones. So when we are trying to conceive, it is all about the hormones. Hormone balance is so critical, and estrogen is the key to it all. So it's very important to understand what is going on in your own unique body as it relates to estrogen. So I'm going to share with you a couple of different things in this video. First, I'm going to talk about why estrogen is so important. I'm going to share with you the role of estrogen during your menstrual cycle, and I'm going to give you a couple of tips on how you can raise your estrogen levels if your estrogen is a little bit low. So let's go ahead and get started. Why is estrogen so important? I think the first thing to note is that there are actually 3 different types of estrogen in our body. There is estrone, which is E1, estradiol, which is E2, and esterol, which is E3. For the purposes of reproduction, estradiol, E2, is the hormone that we are most concerned with. So that's the one that our doctors are testing, that's the one that we're monitoring, that is the one, that is the estrogen, that is the main one that we're looking at for the purposes of reproduction and trying to conceive. So men also make estrogen, but it is the primary reproductive sex hormone in women. So estrogen is key because it regulates our entire menstrual cycle. And it has primarily been kind of regulating our entire cycle ever since puberty. So years and years and years in the making. Estrogen has been dominating our monthly cycle, in a way maybe dominating our lives. So estrogen is super, super, super important, and it's really important to make sure you have an understanding of what it's doing in your cycle. So the reason that estrogen is so important, the key role that estrogen plays is actually twofold. So during your cycle, after your period is over and before ovulation, estrogen is increasing in your body. Estrogen plays such an important role in basically directing your body to get ready for ovulation. The first thing that estrogen does is it facilitates the production of your cervical fluid. I've said it before, cervical fluid is super important when we're trying to conceive, especially when we're trying to conceive naturally. It helps the swimmers get to where they need to go. Cervical fluid is so important to have an appropriate amount of cervical fluid, as well as the good fertile quality cervical fluid that we need for our fertility. So estrogen is at the root of all of that. If our estrogen levels are low, we're not going to produce the amount of cervical fluid that we need. And by monitoring our cervical fluid, we might even be able to get some insight as to what our estrogen, if our estrogen levels are low, we can get some insight on that from monitoring our cervical fluid. So first and foremost, estrogen facilitates the production of cervical fluid. Hugely important. Second of all, estrogen is also getting our uterine lining ready to accept a pregnancy if we achieve one. So during the pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle, again, the time from the end of our period up through ovulation, as our estrogen levels in our body is increasing, our lining is thickening as well, so that if we achieve a pregnancy, our uterus will be able to accept that. Also hugely important. So estrogen is super, super, super important. Estrogen is the bomb. Estrogen basically dominates that pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle called the follicular phase, when our follicles are growing. So estrogen dominates that entire phase of our cycle. Estrogen is a cooling hormone, which is why we see during that pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle, why we see our basal body temperatures on the lower side. After ovulation, estrogen levels drop, and progesterone, the hormone progesterone, becomes the dominant hormone for the latter part of our cycle. So our cycle is a dance of many hormones, but the key ones really are estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen during the pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle, and progesterone during the post-ovulatory phase of our cycle, or the luteal phase. I've done a video about the importance of progesterone. If you haven't gone to see that one, go back and watch that one. You'll learn all about why progesterone is important and how you can keep track of that. In this video, we're focusing on estrogen. So again, estrogen is the dominant hormone in the pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle. It's going to be characterized by basal body temperatures on the lower side, since estrogen is a cooling hormone. And we're also going to see increased production of cervical fluid, super important for trying to conceive, as well as the thickening of our uterine lining, also super important for trying to conceive. So estrogen is really, really, really important. So a note, if you are taking Clomid, if you are in fertility treatment and are under the care of a reproductive endocrinologist, chances are you may have been prescribed Clomid. Clomid is a medication that helps to induce ovulation. Clomid is kind of a standard first line of attack from many reproductive endocrinologists. It's widely prescribed even if you're not having ovulatory issues. It's just a very standard first line of attack treatment protocol among reproductive endocrinologists for fertility patients, fertility treatment. If you are taking Clomid, one of the side effects of Clomid is that it can thin out your uterine lining. And we already know that we need to have a thick uterine lining to have, for successful getting ready for implantation. So it's a little bit of a paradox. So if you're taking Clomid, you need to make sure that you are being monitored by your doctor, that your estrogen levels are being monitored, and that if your estrogen levels are low and your lining is too thin, that you're supplementing that with estrogen supplementation to help keep your lining thick, because that is very important for a successful treatment cycle. So Clomid can do some great things, but that is one thing that is not so great about Clomid, because again, that estrogen is so, so, so important. So if you're taking Clomid, just make sure that you're monitoring your estrogen and receiving the appropriate supplementation if you need that. So if your estrogen levels are low naturally, your doctor's done testing and has found that your estrogen is low, one way that you can work on to raise your estrogen levels is through diet. Diet is like the root of everything, I think. Food is the best medicine that we have. And diet can go a long way towards helping you raise those estrogen levels naturally. So eating a healthy diet with, lots of leafy green vegetables, healthy fats, things like avocados and nuts and olive oil and, seeds and berries, those are all really, really wonderful foods that can help to raise our estrogen levels naturally. So I'd look into that if your estrogen levels are low. I've got a recipe on my website for what I call estrogen boosting smoothie. You can go to my website and grab that. I'm going to post the link below. That is just one thing that you can try to help to raise your estrogen levels, and really incorporating those foods into your diet overall should really, really help you with that if your estrogen levels are low. So as women, age, our estrogen production does decrease, which is one of many reasons why it's more difficult for older women to get pregnant, because we're just not making as much estrogen as we used to. And as we approach menopause, that estrogen levels are just going to keep decreasing and decreasing. Again, estrogen is so important. Just to recap, it is the dominant hormone of our menstrual cycle. It primarily dominates during the pre-ovulatory phase of our cycle. After ovulation, progesterone kicks in as the dominant hormone. So it really is that dance between estrogen and progesterone that really sets us up for success in our menstrual cycle. Estrogen is important because A, it facilitates the production of cervical fluid, and B, because it helps get our lining nice and thick and ready to receive an embryo if we achieved fertilization during our cycle. So hope this has been helpful. I'd love to hear your comments below. Go to my website and grab that recipe for the estrogen boosting smoothie, and we'll see you again sometime soon. Baby dust to you. Bye-bye.